Hey, it's Joyce Conroy wishing you a very happy new year. And 2024 is going to be a good one, especially on the block party at Ernie's Corner. And it's so great to have award-winning and creative director and designer with us, Ernie Cefalu. This is our segment, Ernie's Corner. Ernie, wishing you a great 2024. I know that you have a lot of great things planned. You're not one just to sit around.
No, no, I'm busy as a one-armed paper hanger, at a wallpaper convention. So, it's just really exciting to start the new year out. We've been doing this for over a year and a half now, every week. And, honestly, I was going through a stack of records. I found five more that are on that list that I gave you that we haven't even started to talk about yet. So,
Can't wait. We can't wait.
well, I mean, I hope that you and our neighbors don't get crazy and bored with it, but it's kind of for me, each one of these is like an exciting adventure to kind of relive. And Ben Vereen and working with Ben Vereen, it's very surprising the connection. We always talk about how all these things are connected, and they, we're sort of filling in dots that weren't connected, so other people can add their dots to it and connect it all. Ben Vereen is an amazing story because in 1975, he was on Buddha Records, and it was his first solo album. And I was already a big fan from his off-Broadway stuff. He had done a lot of off-Broadway stuff, Sweet Charity with Sammy Davis Jr., all these amazing people that he was kind of like an understudy and a background dancer and singer, and he really worked his way up. He worked his way up through the ranks, and he did it the hard way, which is, really working hard and being very talented at what he was able to do. So anyway, we're at the crossroads of the world. This is 1975, and he comes by. Ben Vereen shows up unannounced with Avery Schreiber. Okay, and we talk. I mean, I'm going to start connecting dots down here. Avery, as you know, we were doing stuff with Little David Records. Avery and Jack Burns were on Little David, and we did some stuff with them, and we talked about a couple of those things. We'll talk about more as the year goes on, because there's plenty of stuff. Watergate Comedy Hour is one that we really should talk about, because this year will be very appropriate to have that in our
Absolutely
in our library. And so Avery shows up with Ben Vereen, and it's like, I can't believe it, because I was already a huge fan. And it turns out, and I didn't know this, but Avery was Ben Vereen had a 4-week summer variety show, and Avery Schreiber was a regular on that show. So they became really good friends. And, through going back to, Monty Kaye and Jack Lewis and Little David Records, it all kind of sort of starts blending together. And then I'm going to take you one step further back to a production called Jesus Christ Superstar, where Ben Vereen plays Judas.
Whoa.
And yeah. And I only watched him perform when we were at St. Peter's Cathedral for the launch, for the media and all that stuff of the Jesus Christ Superstar album, and I watched him perform live with the rest of the ensemble there that were the original singers and stuff on the album. And we had talked about Yvonne Elliman earlier, and Ben Vereen was one of those others, and I had kind of forgot about that. I forgot that he was that, but I know that he was Chicken George in Roots. And that came after we had done this album for him. So he had an interesting career, because he started out as a dancer, singer, then he became a solo artist. And, this offstage album that we did for him was like I said, it was his first solo album. And he was on Buddha Records. And, because, though he had control over what was being done and who could do it for him, and Buddha didn't really have an art department. They used freelance, so there was really not a problem that we would run into with most cases. And we're Little David's agency, so Monty Kaye is like best friends with these guys. And Ben Vereen had not only seen and loved what I did for Jesus Christ Superstar without knowing who did it, You know, it's like when I talked to the drummer from Foghat a couple of weeks ago, and he had no idea that, you know, I was the one that did that logo for him and all this stuff, and that his albums were featured in a show at the Smithsonian in Memphis for 18 months. So, I mean, finding out all these kind of neat things and having you giving me the opportunity to do it, it really resonates good with me too, because it keeps my mind sharp. And when I look in the mirror, I remember who I'm looking at. So it's all good, and I want to thank you for that. So anyway, we, you know, we hit it off. I mean, he came to the office. He was already familiar with stuff that we had done, and he had already taken photography. Had photography that was from it was the niece of Ramsey Lewis. Okay, his niece took the photography. Her name was Eugene Lewis. It was his niece. And go back even further, I met Ramsey Lewis at the Jazz on Grass concert that I did on Staten Island in 1970. It was one of the early gigs that I got freelance. And it was this huge jazz concert, Last Poets, Ramsey Lewis, all these amazing, you know, blues and jazz acts. And I did the poster and all the graphics and stuff for it. And I had met him because I got a chance to meet everybody that was there. The people that brought me in to do all this were the ones that put it all together. So I had an opportunity to meet him. I mean, I'm sure he didn't remember me, but and it wasn't him that I was revisiting. It was his niece. So we were able to communicate a little bit about that, and she was aware of it, of that concert and stuff. And because it did really, you know, it had a lot of impact. And you know, the Last Poets were huge at that time. The revolution will not be televised. That song and the Last Poets were really getting to be known. So, you know, they came to me with this photography, and, you know, she had tried to do the cover, I guess. And he wasn't really quite happy with what it was looking like. I mean, and the photography was less than it could have been, but it was better than we get most of.
I know, or nothing at all.
Yeah. And so, you know, oh, and one other thing, when he was in, he was also in Roots with LeVar Burton, okay, who played Kunta Kinte. And years after that, we did the Rock and Bowl thing, and Flo and Eddie got all these stars and stuff. And LeVar Burton was one of the TV stars that came. He was like Roots was huge, and he was a huge star, you know. So there's all these like dots that I keep remembering and thinking about that connect all these different things that led up to this album. And you know, so we I guess he wasn't really pleased with what was going on, so he gave us the photography, and we didn't have very long to do it. I seem to remember it was just several days, because they had messed around with trying to do something and then giving direction and trying to change it, and it never quite got to where he wanted it. But we were tied. There was no time to do another photo shoot, so we worked with the photography we had. It wasn't terrible, but it could have been better. And so what I did, and I think what they were trying to do was trying to make the photography the main big thing. Again, back to the mentality of album cover design in those days: picture of the group or individual artist, name and title of the album at the top, you know, top third of the album. So, I don't think that the pictures were interesting enough and kind of sharp enough to, and again, there was no Photoshop where we could go in and start adjusting things digitally. There was etching film, which was like caveman way of trying to make it better. And it more times than not, it made it worse. And so then you'd have to remake film, and it was just a big fiasco. So I found this border, and we kind of put that border on the front and back, put the picture inside the border, which again, you know, if it would have been any bigger than I used them, it would have really been obvious that they weren't what they should have been. They would have looked really fuzzy and dark and hard to see. And so I put them inside this. So now it's taking up less space, but it's still a good picture that you can see of him on the front and back. and then I just put some lettering together. I didn't have time to do any hand lettering or anything. And when we got this album, we were already pretty swamped. I mean, Pacific Ioneer stayed pretty busy all the time. If it wasn't music stuff, it was corporate stuff. And then sometimes both at the same time, which was more, usually what happened. We'd be working on, I think I mentioned 4 to 6 albums a month, and at least that many corporate pieces. So everybody stayed really busy. And the fact that, these illustrators, our early corporate stuff was not like Nestle where they needed to see pictures. So illustration was a lot of electronics equipment, speakers, JBL, Altec Lansing, Serwin Vega, where illustration could still find an interesting place to live. Okay, but you still needed the photography of the product, but you could lead off with illustration, which was really our strong suit. So we put this album together pretty hastily, and I think it came out really good. I know that LeVar liked it because I heard it back through Little David, through Monty K, that they were very pleased with what we had done. And it's really funny because Neil Bogart was working for Buddha and left Buddha and started Casablanca. And it was that around that same time that all these little, we talked about this before, all these little independent record companies were popping up and signing acts and then being distributed by a major label. So they didn't have to worry about the distribution. It was already set up, and the big labels wanted those acts. I mean, when you got Flip Wilson, George Carlin, the Modern Jazz Quartet, the acts like that, the Committee, established acts, they wanted them. And so the only way they could get them was to sign a great deal with Little David. Those little companies were smart. They were really, really smart in how they set it all up and kind of carved a place for them in the big record companies, finances, and were able to divert some of it to them and to the artists. Because I think that the artists themselves that are signed to those labels, and I know firsthand from some of the groups that I work with and from being so tight with Little David and Alive, being part of the family, you hear things and you're around, and the artists never complain on either one of those labels about the money they got. That it's very hard to find, especially in the entertainment business, it's very hard to find people that will be, ambassadors for your brand. And Monty K was amazing. So was Jack Lewis and Flip Wilson. They all have their craziness, especially comedians.
That's for sure.
They're out there, man. Let me tell you, I work with a bunch of them, and the bigger they are, the crazier they were. So, but that's how that's how you live. You live on the edge. That's how they're able to be so great. They're in a place that nobody else is. George was like that, working so close with George Carlin for all those years. That guy was amazing. He was just incredible. He was so plugged into everything from naming each crack of your knuckle on every finger and toes to knowing what's going on in the government and how, things are happening that we should be aware of, and the English language and the understanding and control he had of that. It was amazing. It's truly amazing. And I've worked, Albert Brooks, Cheech and Chong. They were all amazing in their own way. Franklin and Jay, just incredible stuff. And we're going to talk about somewhere down this new year. We've got a lot of really great stuff lined up for the new year, and I'm very excited. And we did an Albert Brooks album at some point, and maybe we'll gang that up with a couple other comedy albums and, bring the new year in with a laugh, or at least midway in or whatever. It's up to you. But, I think that those things, you need that. You don't hear that so much today.
You're very right. And, you really mentioned something about those little independent record companies. The early days of FM, they were happening like in the late 60s. And of course, had in the early 70s. And a lot of the FM stations, they were featuring a lot of those acts. And I look at like rock stations, those, the Canadian bands were just coming into their own in the States. And they were starting, those early FM radio stations were getting hold of a lot of of those acts that were on those independent labels, and they were getting airplay. So it just complemented each other. You
Yeah.
know, like they got the radio play along with the fan play from the records.
Right, and becoming aware in other states and countries that they're known for. I mean,
Yes.
a lot of those bands, Black Oak, Arkansas, that's a perfect example. We talked about some of the albums you did for them. They came up playing all these tertiary markets that groups, even secondary groups, would even consider touring through. And they just built that following. I mean, and a lot of these acts from this time were doing that. Ben Vereen is a perfect one and a perfect example. He worked his way up through the ranks, and what a talent! What an
Yes.
amazing talent! And now he's a preacher with 5 kids, and it's really incredible. I would love to hook up with him again. We got a chance to meet, like I said, it was brief, but because we had so many people in common, starting with Avery Shriver and Monty Kay and Jack Lewis and all these other people that we were, known to. And he kept hearing our name. He kept hearing our name, with Jesus Christ Superstar and Robert Stigwood, because Robert was a huge fan of Ben Vereen's and did a lot to help him in his career. And he would talk about the fact that we did all the Jesus Christ Superstar tour stuff with him, the Bee Gees. I mean, Bob Stigwood was a huge fan, and God bless him. He really helped us. We were very lucky, Joyce, to be in the right spot at the right time with the right stuff. And when you can combine those, I mean, in the 60s, we used to call it all the planets aligning. In Egypt, they called it a scarab beetle pushing dung balls out in all directions. So, I mean, we were very much like that, very lucky. So,
Oh, that is, and I always loved Ben Vereen's smile because just being the
yeah.
great performer that he was, when he was, I saw him mostly on television. Wow, to have seen him on stage would have been amazing. But
Oh, yeah.
he just had that presence. Again, you've got to have, yeah, you have to have the talent, but that charisma, and Ben absolutely had it.
Yeah, he did. He
And
really did.
thank you for capturing. Look, there's his smile, like
Yeah.
for our friends who
Yeah.
are listening on radio, the album is off stage and you will see this wonderful smile. And that's what I always think about, when Ben Vereen was on television, just that
Yeah.
great,
Well,
personality.
he had a great career on TV as well. I mean, and on stage, a lot of off-Broadway stuff, because he was a singer, he was a dancer, he was, background guy. And worked his way up. I mean, it's really amazing when you can do that. I mean, I sort of did that. And again, I always relate these things to myself because not only was I part of it, but it really runs parallel to my career and how, I took a chance and went to New York, had a wonderful girlfriend that made me stay there and face rejection. Had that never happened, none of this stuff that we would have ever talked about for the last year and a half would have happened. And that's freaky. When you start thinking about that kind of thing, I know I'm blessed. Somebody up there loves me, and I'm a firm believer in people who have passed along, who have loved us, and watch out for us to this day.
I believe that too very firmly,
They
Ernie.
call them
Again,
guardian angels.
yeah, we were just talking about angels, especially with the Jesus Christ Superstar. And I think those angels, they resonate on even though they're not there in a lot of your projects, they're there. And I think that really set the stage for you and set the stage for many.
Yeah. Well, I hear, because of social media, I was always the inside guy. So I would only meet with groups or people that came to the office. My partner was the outside guy that got a chance to meet everybody and do business, which was fine because somebody needed to run the inside. That you have an inside guy and an outside guy, and that's how it works in a perfect partnership. And so when social media came along, I was just floored that how many people not knew me, but knew Pacific Pioneer. Because I never really put my name, only later on, and a few times you'll find my name on an album when Bill Levy would give me the opportunity and to give me a project. And we've talked about that before, and we're going to be talking about it again here in a minute. But having Pacific Pioneer, the brand back then, I didn't know what a brand was. I didn't know any. I just did what I felt was good. I didn't start understanding branding and marketing and messaging until I started working with Nestle and Coca-Cola and Kraft. That I think there were, again, I had mentors that took me under their wing and taught me all about that and why I did what I did and how to make what I did better, because that you can always make it better. You know, some people do something and they're really satisfied, they fall in love with it. We all have a tendency to do that.
Yeah, that's
But,
so natural. Yeah.
yeah. But I was taught that when you've got it, it's like one of those snow globes. You take it and you shake it, turn it upside down and shake it, and sit it back down and see how it looks. Because it's totally different when you do that than when it's not moving. Nothing's moving in there. So you always have to sort of look at it from different angles, which is what I do. That's how when I go to a grocery store and I see a new product that I really like, and I'll take that product that catches my eye and I'll put it in another category. I'll take it in a whole different department of the store and see how it resonates there. And it's usually something that I'm working on. Recently, with Ocean Spray, doing all the work with Ocean Spray I was doing that. I was taking products out of different sections in the market and in drugstores and putting them in a completely different environment, in the environment of the brand that I was going to be working on, to see how it stood out color-wise, wow, design, what catches my eye. And most people don't do that. They won't take the time to do that. I learned that going to record stores.
Yeah, because it's just like that with music, and,
yes,
and you sometimes you take it out of a different environment. Well, that's one of the reasons I'm in public radio, because, the listener, Block Party, yes, rock and roll is fabulous, but there's a lot of other connections.
Yeah.
And then,
yeah.
and wow, that is a great, thank you for sharing that, Ernie.
Oh, no, thank you. And what we're going to be talking about now is another example of something like that happening. And we're going to talk about
the magic screen.
Yeah, there we go. A lot
Erik
of people
Satie. Wow.
Yeah, Erik Satie, yeah. And this was a very interesting album. We were known for rock and roll. Okay. We were known for, even though we did Sesame Street, the majority of the stuff we were doing was rock and roll. And again, in 1972, when we started Pacific Pioneer, I had a huge, huge mentor, sponsor. His name was Bill Levy. He was the creative director, senior creative director at Decca Records. We had formed a bonding relationship with Jesus Christ Superstar. We had talked about that in the other show, and we talked about it in the last Jesus Christ Superstar we talked about. But Bill played an important part in my career and in my life. And he taught me things that I still think about to this day. That's when you know you have a really great mentor, when you can, I never thought I'd use anything that I learned in college in my career, but I have over and over again, time after time, referred back to what I had learned. And, you don't realize it at the time, I guess, or at least I didn't. I was too, out of it most of the time, but didn't even know who I was. But, I learned how to be able to think about things differently. And Bill Levy was one of those kind of guys. He kept giving me projects that were difficult. Okay, Ernie, you're known for your rock and roll stuff, and Alice Cooper. Here's chamber music.
Oh no, it's like
here's some chamber music, because wow. Under Decca Records, London Records was under Decca. They were distributed. We talked about that just recently with the Ben Vereen album. Buddha was distributed by a major, and this was distributed by a major, Decca Records. So Bill gave me this project, and again, he could have given it to anybody. He could have given it to. He could have done it himself. Part of it, I think, is because a big part of it is because he wanted me to. You throw me a curveball. I'm expecting a fire, head-on fastball, and he throws me a curve. And am I going to swing like a sucker, or am I going to dig in and really analyze it and really become part of it? And I think the other reason was that he wanted a trip out to L.A. because he came out. He came out, and we scouted. I had scouted some locations before he came out when we got the project, because we were going to be shooting it, here in LA. And there was a girl named Wendy Lang, who was a photographer, and Bill wanted to use her. I didn't really know her and never had worked with her before, but that's okay. Sometimes you do that. One of the things that I had to learn, even though I had done some pretty big things and my head was getting bigger with each one, I had to learn how to be humble and take direction, whether it's from the client or another person that I'm working with. Because if I approach it that way, then I'm going to learn something. If I approach it like, and I've done it. I've approached it like, well, don't you know who I am? I've done this and I've done that, and it gets an entirely different reaction from the people you're working with when you say, well, what do you think? I mean, how about this? And make a suggestion and let them make a suggestion and be open to it. That's one of the problems that we have today in our country. We're not open to, other opinions. It's all got to be one way. Otherwise, you're labeled and tagged and hated. So, part of what I needed to learn how to do was to be humble and to listen to other people, because I don't, just because it's my idea, it doesn't have to end up that way. And that was one of the important lessons that I learned with working with guys like Bill Garland and Drew Struzan and Carl and Joe Garnett and all these people, about how I'd give them an idea, and by the time the idea was finalized, it was so much better than what I came in with. That's when you're working with people that are adding value and are willing to add value and not get into an ego trip or whatever. So this particular album was a real challenge. And again, I know Bill wanted to come out, but I think part of it was to just sort of check in, see Pacific Eye and Ear, what it's all about. We're in the crossroads of the world. And the weather was much nicer here than it was in New York. And because he was a senior creative director there, he could drive anytime he wanted. And I think he liked LA. He ended up retiring in Arizona. But I think he liked LA. He liked the Hollywood scene. He was a really great person, and I miss him. He passed away 5 or 6 years ago. It was funny because we lost so much time with, losing track like life will do and take you in different directions. But then reuniting, we hooked up again 2 or 3 years before he passed away. He and his wife, and they'd come here on their way to Northern California, and we'd have dinner and they'd stay overnight. It was great. It was great catching up, great stories. And this particular, I wanted to show you this image, and I'm going to back out of the way. So what we did was we scouted this location in downtown LA. I wanted it to reflect chamber music, but also this was one of the early uses, and I think the first use of a Moog synthesizer in chamber music.
Yeah, I don't associate Erik Satie with anything electronic, and this is
I know. Well,
it's eye-opening, just the design that you have right there
yeah,
too.
well, and he was he was a French composer in the 1800s who had this. He had, and I don't know how much music of his you're familiar with. I'm not with a lot, but he was known for his adding a lot of humor in his compositions, in his music, and which was totally unheard of. Chamber music was so stuffy and sophisticated, and
Yeah.
he really got off on adding these whimsical kind of things. Because when I got this album, I went to the library, which was called a record store. There was a store that actually sold records in bins. You don't have that anymore. It's all online, but there were these places called record stores. So I went to a Tower Records and I got a couple of Erik Satie albums, and they were awesome. They were really great because there was a voiceover in this particular album. There was a voiceover in French and in English that sort of told you about what you're about to hear and the whimsical part of it. And so I wanted to make sure that I was stuffy with the chamber music kind of look and feel. It's almost like a monastery. It's that kind of level of deep music appreciation. But then there's also the electronic side of it, which is what we did over here on this.
Yes.
And I want to back out of the way here so you can just take a minute and look at the whole thing together. I mean, it's really a great package, and not
The
just because we did it.
Well, the best of both worlds, the
Yes.
combination of the electronic spirit, you definitely, and then, with the chamber music, the elegance
Yeah. And
uh,
the
and the
classiness,
class,
the elegance,
that's it.
the solitude. When you listen to chamber music, you're not tapping your foot, you're not, bopping your head. You're deep in thought because that's what chamber music does. It takes you to a whole different place, which is what's on the front cover. But then when you look at what's coming toward it, it's that you hit it perfectly, a nail on the head there, saying that it's this a lot electronic thing because the Moog, and I think you had mentioned you named some groups that were using Moogs early on.
Yeah, the Monkees, they were doing it. One of their songs, Daily Nightly and Star Collector, they started using it a lot, in their LP, Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones. Tommy James and the Shondells with
Yeah,
Cellophane Symphony,
yeah,
and then
and then
more groups.
a lot of bands started using it, right?
Yes, they started using it, started adding more and more of the Moog synthesizer in there, and Peter Tork, I love what he said. He goes, "You don't want to overdo it with the Moog. You just want to add it in there to give a little bit of a maybe even ambiance or
Yeah,
just a different feel to the song, like an ethereal feeling to the song."
sure. And also to have that listener wait for it again
Yeah,
because it was so different that they wanted. It's like the way they do hit singles, and it's that when they repeat that little niche that that you have to hear and you're waiting for it. And then sometimes they don't do it the next time, but then they'll bring it back in. It's like this composing. I watched Bob Ezrin a lot when we were doing a lot of the Alice Cooper stuff, and he was like amazing. He was like Jack was our Jack on the computer. He was with music and a musician himself, but just knew how. I mean, when you listen to a song, when you listen to this music, how do you create that? How do you get it? And how do you get it to make it where a lot of people will love it? It'll make people think. I mean, doing production in like Bob Ezrin and Joe Wizard with Earth, Wind, and Fire, I met a lot of producers, Jack Douglas, and a lot of them are musicians themselves for sure. They have to be, but there are ones that just know what sounds good. They don't know how to play an instrument, but they sure know how to put this in and that. And I've met a couple like that as well.
yeah.
There's a group called Buckwheat that we're going to be talking about in the coming months that had a producer like that. And
Oh, I'm
sometimes,
getting excited now. You're
yeah,
really getting
yeah,
us
yeah.
excited, Ernie.
Oh, well, we got, for our fans on the block and on my corner this year, I'm putting a whole new look to the corner. So I'm going to do some renovation on the corner, and with your permission. I mean, it's just going to be what we've been doing, but stuff that we haven't talked about. We've just touched the tip of the iceberg here.